Kaelrin crouched silently in the tall violet grass, her dual hearts pounding as the sky above cracked open with fire. A comet, no, a foreign object, tore through the upper atmosphere, trailing smoke. The air shuddered. She clutched her spear, instincts sharpening. This was no storm. Seconds later, the crash shook the valley. The Elder's law echoed in her mind: do not engage humans. Ever. She stood frozen. Her mission was to complete her rite of passage, not chase fallen stars. And yet something deep within pulled her toward the crater. The smoke stung her eyes as she reached the site. Twisted metal, blackened earth, and the unmistakable scent of burning oxygen. Her people hadn't used such crude ships in centuries. Lying among the wreckage was a figure, tall, bloodied, armored in something foreign. Human. Alive. She should have turned away. Reported it. Let the elders purge the site, as they always did with forbidden things. But the man groaned, clutching his side, blood soaking into foreign fabrics. Despite the law, despite the fear drilled into every Vorin child, she moved toward him. His eyes opened. Blue. Wild. Terrified. His lips parted. Help me! Kaelrin swore under her breath. She pulled him out. Carrying his weight wasn't easy, but adrenaline guided her. She knew of a hidden cavern, a relic from ancient wars, where no elder's eye could see. There, in the dark, she laid him down, uncertain whether she just saved a life or condemned her own. He faded in and out of consciousness. In his delirium, he muttered names, memories, fragments of stories. They shot us down. Emergency landing. No time to signal. He grabbed her wrist weakly. They'll come. Don't trust them. She didn't speak, only watched. Every breath he took cracked the foundation of her upbringing. For hours she sat guard, mind spiraling. What made him different? The elders claimed humans were dangerous, uncontainable, treacherous. But this man wasn't violent. He was broken. Alone. Dying. And in that fragility, he mirrored the parts of her that never fit in, the defiance she never voiced. By the time dawn broke, her decision was made. She returned with healing roots, woven cloth, and nutrient paste. He tried to protest, mumbling something about rules, but she silenced him with a look sharper than any blade. Let me fix what your kind broke, she whispered, her first words to him. His name, she learned, was Commander Eli Vance. He was part of an exploration team that veered too close to forbidden space. They hadn't attacked, they'd just gotten lost. The elders had responded with missiles. Days passed. She stitched his wounds, fed him, watched him grow stronger. In return, he told her stories of Earth. Of oceans that roared louder than Vorin storms. Of cities made of glass and music. Of people who never stopped fighting, not because they craved war, but because they craved choice. His voice had gravity. Not the kind that pulled your body down, but the kind that made you question why you'd ever wanted to fly in the first place. His stories burned brighter than their forbidden nature. They made her dream. But every dream carries a shadow. On the 8th day, she returned from a supply run to find tracks near the cavern. Elder patrol. She erased them, cleaned the area, moved Eli deeper into the cave. She said nothing, but he saw the tension in her eyes. Am I worth this? He asked quietly. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. That night, she sat beside him, sharpening her spear. Why do your kind never obey? He chuckled weakly. Because obedience without reason is just fear. Silence fell between them. In that silence, Kaelrin realized the truth. The elders didn't fear human violence. They feared something worse. They feared what humans could inspire. And now, she understood why. Eli's fever broke after 2 more days, and with clarity returned his questions. Kaelrin answered few, but she listened. His voice was steady now, the rasp of survival gone. He spoke of resistance, not war. Of how humans argued with their leaders, questioned systems, and dared to say no when it mattered. He was unlike anyone she'd met. Vorin were trained from birth to follow law, to never question the elders. Curiosity was dangerous. But Eli's every word was a challenge to that belief. "You think obedience makes you strong," he said once. "But you never got to choose it. That's not strength, it's programming." His words stung, not because they were wrong, but because they were true. She had always felt it, that quiet hum of doubt whenever she knelt before the elders. A sense that something was missing. And now, the missing piece sat across from her, bandaged, bruised, and impossibly human. She watched him sketch maps of the stars in dirt, teach her Earth idioms, laugh when she misunderstood. He explained what a rebellious spirit was and smiled when he said it lived in her already. She didn't deny it. She asked why his kind kept coming, knowing the risks. "We never stopped believing others could change," he replied. "Even if they try to kill us first." She realized then what frightened the elders most, not human strength, but the idea that someone might look into a human's eyes and see truth, and choose to follow it. One evening, Kaorin stumbled upon a data slate buried beneath temple ruins near the cave. Forbidden archives, encrypted in the old tongue. It took hours, but when it opened, her breath caught. The truth was there, records from a century ago. Vorin and humans once collaborated. Not in war, but in rebuilding after a cataclysm. The alliance had been powerful, too powerful. The elders feared loss of control, not danger. They outlawed contact, erased history, branded humanity a threat. They lied. She confronted Eli with the discovery, jaw clenched, fists trembling. He wasn't surprised. "We make people uncomfortable. Always have. But sometimes discomfort is how truth walks in." Kaorin paced, her mind splitting in two. She wasn't just breaking a law. She was standing against an empire of silence. Her whole life had been built on fear of what this man embodied: freedom. That night, distant voices echoed across the cliffs. Patrols. They were closer now. Eli rose, leaning on a carved staff she'd given him. "It's time I go. I won't let you fall because of me." She stepped in front of the exit. "You wouldn't last an hour out there." He smiled. "Maybe not. But I'd rather die free than hide in someone else's shame." She felt the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. She wanted to believe the system could change from within, that someone would listen. But now, she saw what he saw. Sometimes, the only way to fight a lie is to become a truth so loud it can't be ignored. He touched her shoulder. "You gave me more than shelter, Kale. You reminded me why we fight." That night she packed his gear. Not to send him away, but to go with him. Not as a protector, but as a partner in defiance. Neither spoke as they vanished into the wild. Words weren't needed anymore. Kaorin's capture came at dawn. They surrounded her in silence, armored enforcers with cloaks bearing the elder insignia. Her weapons were stripped, her hands bound. They did not ask questions. There was no need. They had already judged her. The trial was swift. The elder chamber, vast and cold, echoed with accusations. Violation of the prime law. Harboring a human. Corruption of the ancient order. She stood in the center, silent, unbowed. The High Elder, draped in silver, spoke without emotion. "You were raised in truth, trained in honor. And still, you brought a human among us. What say you?" Kaelrin raised her head. "I saw a lie. And I chose not to live under it." A ripple moved through the crowd. Her words were bold. Unforgivable. "You have doomed our world to chaos," the High Elder hissed. "No," she replied. "You doomed it the day you turned fear into law." The sentence was exiled to the silent wastes. A fate worse than death. No contact, no tools, no name. Just wind, sand, and time. As guards pulled her away, the crowd watched, unmoving. Her mother lowered her eyes. Her mentor said nothing. The silence cut deeper than chains. Eli had vanished 3 days earlier. She'd insisted he run when the patrols got too close. Now she walked alone, bound and branded, toward nothing. The transport shuttle lifted her from the city. Her mind was blank, her heart numb. She had defied them, spoken truth, and it had changed nothing. The shuttle landed on a barren cliff. She was shoved to the ground. A guard turned to leave, then paused, frozen. A human voice called out behind him. "Let her go." Eli stood there, wrapped in scavenged armor, eyes hard as stone. The guard drew his weapon. Eli struck first. In moments, it was chaos. Kael'ren, still bound, ducked as plasma bolts hissed past. Eli fought with desperation, with fury, not to win, but to reach her. He slammed into the last guard and shattered the stunned cuffs. "You came back," she breathed. "You didn't think I'd let them silence you, did you?" Together they ran. Alarms blared in the distance. Drones would come. More soldiers. But they had no plan to fight an army. They only had a voice. They climbed a rusted tower from the old wars, once forbidden, now forgotten. Eli rewired the transmitter, his fingers shaking. Kael'ren opened the stolen data slate, her face lit by ancient truth. Broadcast initiated. Her voice reached every city, every outpost. She spoke not as a traitor, but as a witness. "They told us humans were chaos. But they were only afraid we'd see what they really feared, choice. I chose. You can too." The feed cut out minutes later. But it was enough. The message spread. Some denounced her. Others listened. A few stood up. And somewhere deep in the Elder Tower, one counselor removed their badge and walked away. The days that followed were chaos. Rumors spread faster than the elders could silence them. Kael'ren's broadcast had torn through the outer colonies, reaching workers, warriors, and scholars who had long buried their doubts. Her voice, once a whisper beneath layers of doctrine, had become a signal. Not everyone believed her, but many had already begun to question. That was enough. She and Eli moved constantly, hiding in ruins and caves, living on stolen rations and ancient tech. Neither complained. They didn't speak of hope, but it lived in every step they took. They weren't trying to lead a revolution. They were just trying to stay free. And yet the cracks in the old world kept growing behind them. One evening, a Voran youth found them. Then two more. Then a mechanic. Then a former guard. None of them had answers. They just wanted to know the truth. Kael'ren showed them the data, the real history, the alliance that had once existed between humans and Voran. They listened. And when she finished, they didn't ask for orders. They asked how to share it. In a week, underground channels were flooded with copies of the files. Elders tried to shut them down. Entire networks vanished overnight. But the fire had already caught. For every signal lost, 3 more rose. Kael'ren and Eli never stayed in one place long. They watched the movement grow from shadows. Cities began to protest. A transport station refused to follow a lockdown order. A military squad surrendered their weapons and walked away. One elder temple went dark and never reopened. The final blow came quietly. An emergency assembly was called by the High Elder. A speech. A promise to restore order. Every sector was required to tune in. But before the signal could go live, the broadcast was hijacked. Kael'ren's face appeared. Calm. Unshaken. No longer hiding. "I was taught silence was safety," she said. "That obedience was peace. That humans were poison. But the truth is, silence is a cage, and peace built on fear is not peace at all. I didn't destroy your world. I only held up a mirror." She stepped aside. Eli appeared next, not as a soldier, but a survivor. "You feared us because we refused to kneel. You called it chaos. But it was always choice. And now it's yours." The feed ended. No signal followed. Just silence. But this time, it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence before a storm. By the next moon cycle, 4 elder cities had seceded. A new council formed. One elder, once a loyal enforcer, declared allegiance to the new movement. No war was declared. No armies marched. But the empire shifted. Kael'ren and Eli stood together on a ridge, watching a city light up beneath twin moons. She no longer wore a uniform. He no longer carried a weapon. They had no title, no rank, no banner. But they had done the one thing the elders feared most. They had shown everyone how to say no. And once a single voice breaks the silence never returns.